Hello and welcome back to my fourth and final Pride video. It was a really fun set of videos to make, a little outside of my comfort zone because while I was out on my channel before, it had never been the focus of anything that I've talked about. Now looking back, I'm seeing that I covered some pretty serious topics in the first three, so while my fourth video was going to be about mixed orientation relationships, I've decided that instead I'm going to do something kind of light and fluffy. You know, maybe I'll do mixed orientation relationships next year. So I decided to revisit an old project of mine. Last fall, I had decided to rewrite Pride and Prejudice. So the catch was that I was going to rewrite it so that Miss Elizabeth Bennet was going to be Mr. Elijah Bennet, or young Mr. Bennet, depending on the context. And the whole thing was going to be very, very gay. So basically, I changed names and pronouns, nothing else. And I was not disappointed, and this video is the fruits of that exercise. Now, there's a catch-22 when it comes to producing or consuming queer media. Basically, there are several filters that you have to get your video past if you want to make a queer movie. The first hurdle is typically making sure that your video aligns with what the studio wants to be known for, their brand. If they don't want queerness to be part of their brand, it's a no-go. And the second filter comes through with distribution. Depending on the distributor, depending on the broadcast schedule, you're going to be able to have your project shared in different places and different times than if it was more family friendly. And the result of this is you often have the situation of, well, if we just make it implied, they can't slap us with defunding, censorship, etc. The problem is, though, if you lean too hard into this, it kind of looks like you just don't want to make a gay movie. So this is where queer baiting comes in, which is a movie that implies that there's gayness in it, and it says, oh, just wait and see what happens. And you know there's no gayness coming. You know that that's not their intention because of all the aforementioned reasons, plus probably a sprinkling of their own just not wanting to do it. The result of this is that two things are true at once. On one hand, if there's even implied romance, you're very likely to be like, they're gay. But then the flip side is that if it's not explicit, I have a tendency to just go, yeah, well, I'll believe it when I see it. And while there's a lot of academic literature looking at the proportions of gay characters and the proportion of which they die and the proportion of their relationships that don't turn out and how frequently they will actually show affection, kiss, etc. on panel, on screen, on page, etc., I wanted to try something different for this video. My question is, what happens when you drop a gay relationship into the most famous romance in Western canon? Chapter 1. Things start off weird. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you, and I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever he chooses of the girls, and may as well throw a good word in for Elijah. Right off the bat, we can infer that Elijah's family knows and accepts that he's gay. Obviously, this isn't how Regency England works, but there's a lot of macro stuff that we're just going to have to ignore if we're going to do this exercise, and this is one of them. Now, we do know from the established relationship between Mrs. and Mr. Bennet that he's probably teasing her, and that's actually kind of nice that this is something that they can joke about. I desire you will do no such thing. Elijah is not a bit better than the others, and a young man at that. Besides, I am sure he is not half so handsome as Jane, nor half so good-humored as Lydia. But you are always giving him the preference, even now. And I absolutely love this line because it sheds an entirely new light on the fact that Elijah is Mr. Bennet's favorite. It's also just so incredibly supportive that he's like, yeah, my gay son deserves happiness. Let's see if the new guy in town is into that. My gay little heart. Of course, there's a flip side to that, and that is that instead of having a favorite daughter, his son is now his favorite over all of his daughters, which, typical Regency-era father stuff, am I right? They have none of them much to recommend them, replied he. They are all silly and ignorant like other girls, but young Elijah has something more of quickness than his sisters. You know, it's absolutely absurd, but there's something that's so funny about his father's favorite to the extent that he's better at everything, even being a partner, than his sisters, which is, you know, the only thing that women are good for. Mr. Bennet, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion for my poor nerves. Now, this actually brings me to the second macro thing that is just going to make no sense for this story. And that is that in the original, the daughters were none of them able to inherit the Bennet property because girls couldn't inherit. There's something about the legality. I don't think that this was universal, but it is true for this property. And so they're trying to marry off all the daughters so that they don't end up homeless, basically. So if Elijah is now the inheritor, Mrs. Bennet's insistence that all the kids get married, it makes no sense. We just have to roll with this. I think we're off to a good start. We've established that this is essentially Regency era, except that gayness is, if not totally open and accepting, at least something that's heard of. Now, his parents seem to be of two minds. Mr. Bennet is very, very supportive, but Mrs. Bennet is a little bit cagier. Now, that seems so modern that you would probably assume that I had to change more than pronouns, but I swear I didn't. Honestly, this exercise is showing me just how strong Jane Austen's prose is, and so true to human nature, that if you were to tweak this, it reveals an entire new layer of what's going on below the surface in society between the sexes. It is fascinating. Nothing really worth commenting on happens in chapter 2, so we're going to jump to chapter 3, which is the dance. Elijah Bennet had at last been able to sit down for 2 dances, as the scarcity of other gentlemen had compelled him to continue dancing past the point of his own pleasure in doing so, and during part of that time Mr. Darcy had been standing near enough for him to hear a conversation between him and Mr. Bingley, who came from the dance for a few minutes to press his friend to join it. "Come, Darcy," said he, "I must have you dance. I hate to see you standing about by yourself in this stupid manner. You had much better dance." "I certainly shall not. You know how I detest it, unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner. At such an assembly as this it would be insupportable. Your sisters are engaged, and there is not another woman in the room whom it would not be a punishment for me to stand up with." "I would not be so fastidious as you are," cried Mr. Bingley. "For a kingdom, upon my honour, I have never met with so many pleasant girls in my life as I have this evening, and there are several of them you see uncommonly pretty." "You are dancing with the only pretty girl in the room," said Mr. Darcy, looking at the eldest Miss Bennet. "Oh, she is the most beautiful creature I have ever beheld." Then his voice dipped low, so Elijah had to pay conscious attention to hear. "But there is her brother who's sitting just behind you, who's very handsome and I dare say very agreeable. Do let me ask my partner to introduce you." "Mr. Bingley is the best ally ever." "Who do you mean?" And turning round, he looked for a moment at Elijah, till, catching his eye, he withdrew his own and coldly said, "He is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. I am in no humour at present to face such consequences of being slighted by other men. You had better return to your partner and enjoy her smiles, for you are wasting your time with me." Okay, I did change this last passage. In the original, Mr. Darcy says he doesn't want to dance with a woman who had been scorned by other men. But in this context, that makes no sense because Elijah would be dancing with women as well. So in this, I tweaked the reason why he's embarrassed to dance with Elijah. So what I did was I returned to the context that I had discovered in chapter 1, that between Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, we know that some people are a little bit more open and accepting about there being gay people. Other people are a little bit more reserved. So looking at Mr. Bingley, who's the best ally and the best friend ever, I'm seeing that he would be encouraging his friend, "Hey, that guy's cute, why don't you see if he's interested," etc. Whereas Mr. Darcy is looking around this small town like, "No, I don't know if I really want to put myself out there like that. Thank you, but no thank you." And we're just going to run with that. Now let's take a closer look at how he talks about Elijah. Clearly, he's interested in him. Wait. He's obviously interested? Isn't this that famous scene where Elizabeth overhears him and feels slighted by the stuff that he said about her? Isn't this the catalyst for all of the misunderstanding between them for the rest of the book? This is what I'm talking about when I said that we read queer stories differently because we've gotten so used to the publication and distribution of queer media being necessarily different from the publication and distribution of straight media. In order to get past censors and policies, queer media has to be so desaturated that somebody could look at it and say, yeah, I don't know if there's queerness, it's plausibly deniable, it's safe for the children. And because of that, you become hyper attuned to any hint that there might be something queer going on, because that's all you're going to get. So when he says he's tolerable but not handsome enough to tempt me, it's clear that he's interested in men. There's only one other gay in the story, and that's Elijah, and we know they're going to end up together. The story's over. Chapter 3, we're done. Except that I know how Pride and Prejudice ends. That's not why I'm doing this. We're doing a close reading, and we're trying to figure out what the differences are between how straight romances are written and how gay romances are written. And we have a lot more book to dive through. So let's keep going. If we continue to look closely at this passage, we can see some of the differences in how men and women are talked about, both in general and in literature. It is very common for women to have their appearances commented on as if they are adornment in the room. But it's very uncommon for a man to have his appearance commented on, at least the way that Mr. Darcy does. This is one of the biggest tip-offs that he's gay and interested in Elijah, because he's speaking about him not the way that men talk about other men, but the way that men talk about women. And this is another thing that we're going to have to keep track of. Which brings me to chapter 6, the gayest thing I've ever read. Occupied in observing Mr. Bingley's attention to his sister, Elijah was far from knowing where he stood in the regard of his friend. Mr. Darcy had at first dismissed him out of hand. He had looked at him without admiration at the ball, and when they next met, he looked at him only to criticize. But no sooner had he made it clear to himself and Mr. Bingley that young Mr. Bennet had hardly a good feature in his face, than he began to find it was rendered uncommonly intelligent by the beautiful expression of his dark eyes. To this discovery succeeded some others equally mortifying. Though he had detected with a critical eye more than one failure of perfect symmetry in Mr. Bennet's form, he was forced to acknowledge that his figure was athletic and pleasing, and in spite of his asserting that Mr. Bennet's manners were not those of the fashionable world, he was caught by their easy playfulness. This is not how men talk about each other. On the most granular level, phrases like easy playfulness and the beautiful expression of his dark eyes all seem very weird in the context of a man. These are all very feminine descriptors. But then there's the broader trend that men just don't get commented on the same way that women do. I try to be very even-handed with my compliments. So if I say to a woman, I like your hairstyle, if a guy colleague gets his hair cut, I might say, hey, you're looking sharp. And I can tell that these guys rarely, if ever, get compliments like this. And honestly, I think these guys are missing out. I personally really like getting compliments, especially on things that I can control, like my hair, my makeup, my clothes, my jewelry, etc. That's all great. I put effort into styling myself. So when staffers used to call me Tour Guide Barbie, I didn't take it as an insult. Now, some lady guides would have taken it as an insult because they feel like, oh, all they see is the fact that I'm, glammed up. But me, I just, I take it in stride and I try to give it in stride. From that point of view, men are really missing out. But if compliments are coded female, critique on how someone looks is explicitly a female phenomenon. You don't hear people critiquing how men look the way that you hear people critiquing how women look. So listening to Mr. Darcy do this critique of how Elijah looks, of failures of perfect symmetry, etc., that was weird. So let's see how this resolves. On his approaching them soon afterwards, though without seeming to have any intention of speaking, Miss Lucas defied her friend to mention a subject to him, which immediately provoking Elijah to do it, he turned to him and said, "Did you not think, Mr. Darcy, that I expressed myself uncommonly well just now when I suggested Colonel Foster to give us a ball at Meryton?" "With great energy, Mr. Bennet. On the contrary, it is a subject which makes a lady energetic. So this is something I've had to rely on a few times now, where I have to emphasize a different word in the sentence so that it continues to make sense, even if I don't have to change the words themselves. In the original, the focus was, well, on the contrary, all women are excited about balls. What are you talking about? You're just like everyone else. In this, you have to italicize the fact that he's saying that Elijah is abnormal and in fact is coded female for liking balls, which again is kind of a weird thing because, as they said in chapter 3, there weren't enough men who attended the balls, so maybe they should actually be encouraging men to want to dance. I mean, this is still a problem. What is it about men and not wanting to dance? But I digress. It feels like a critique of his masculinity. Now, this is going to be my last passage because there's been a lot to unpack here, and this video is getting a lot longer than I anticipated. So we're going to finish up chapter 6. This is the part where Caroline comes up to Mr. Darcy at the ball. "I can guess the subject of your reverie. I should imagine not. You are considering how insupportable it would be to pass many evenings in this manner in such society, and indeed I am quite of your opinion. I was never more annoyed. The insipidity, and yet the noise of nothingness, and yet the self-importance of all these people. What would I give to hear your strictures on them? Your conjecture is totally wrong, I assure you. My mind has been more agreeably engaged. I have been meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes and a handsome face can bestow." Now, I thought this was interesting, that the original descriptor was handsome. Mr. Darcy says that Elizabeth Bennet is a handsome woman, and it's an instance where changing names and pronouns is very easy. Miss Bingley immediately fixed her eyes on his face and desired he would tell her what lady had the credit of inspiring such reflections. Mr. Darcy replied with great intrepidity, "Mr. Elijah Bennet." "Mr. Elijah Bennet!" repeated Miss Bingley, before dropping her voice and taking stock of the room. She was quiet for a moment before pressing the matter. "I am all astonishment. How long has he been such a favourite, and pray, when am I to wish you joy?" Now, here's the interesting thing about this passage. I didn't change anything about it, but the subtext is entirely different. In the original, the context is clear. Caroline thinks Elizabeth is poor and therefore is beneath Darcy's notice. In this, it seems that she's more worried about the fact that he's a guy and that Mr. Darcy is gay. It really reads like the kind of woman who continues to hold a candle for their gay friend, and while they're single, she can imagine that, maybe he'll change his mind, maybe he really will fall in love with me, and then as soon as he's actually interested in some guy, she acts all shocked, like, "I didn't think that was actually the case. I thought I still had a chance." Nope. Friend really is gay? That is exactly the question I expected you to ask. A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love, from love to matrimony in a minute. I knew you would be wishing me joy. And again, the subtext is changed in a really interesting way. Jane Austen is famous for her writing about the relationships between men and women, and this is a slight variation on that theme. Instead of Mr. Darcy talking about women as opposed to men, he's talking about women as entirely outside of his realm of interest. A lot of gay men do this, actually. This is a well-documented phenomenon, that gay men will really push women away as far as possible. And probably the most distilled version of this that I've found in history is that in Weimar, Germany. There was a vibrant gay culture there, and their opinion of women is that they're good for being your mom, and they're good for being your maid, and that's it. But it's not just women. They also had the idea that men who loved women, most men, were less masculine than men who loved men. And even more than that, gay men who were a little on the feminine side were also totally disgraceful. Now, not all gay subcultures are like this. This is the most extreme, most distilled version of this philosophy that I've ever found. But you do see echoes of it sometimes, especially when gay men are trying to convince the people around them that, no, they actually are, in fact, gay. See how little regard, see how little I care about women. it's a signal. Some people stick with it, other people outgrow it. Nay, if you are serious about it, I shall consider the matter as absolutely settled. You will have a charming mother in all but law indeed, and of course she will always be at Pemberley with you. He listened to her with perfect indifference while she chose to entertain herself in this manner, and as his composure convinced her that all was safe, her wit flowed long. So here we get the actual context of the protest. Elijah is poor, but even now my brain is straining to say she's backpedaling. She can't bully him into being straight, but she can make him think about all the reasons why this decision in particular is a poor choice, which again is factually not what the book says. And I'm going to have to end this video here, but the takeaways from the video are these. First of all, when you come into reading a gay story, you come in with all of this baggage and context for how to read a gay story. You start to assume things about where the characters are coming from, even if it's not part of the text. And when you read a book that's written about a queer couple, you can be pretty confident that the writer did have those ideas in the back of their head because we're all living in the same culture soup as each other. But in this case, that's literally not the case. Jane Austen is not writing about two men. She is writing about one upper-class lady and an extremely wealthy man. That's the conflict. But when you plug in a guy, suddenly class disappears as a concern, and suddenly the only thing I can focus on is the fact that this is a gay couple. Even when I've read the original book, even when I know this is a story about class, I can't stop thinking about how certain things make sense in the new context. The second thing is just how blatant straight people are when it comes to being in a relationship with each other. The context of this story is that, Mr. Darcy was not explicit enough about his feelings to Elizabeth that she would know that he was interested in her. And yet, when it's two guys, we are so far beyond blatant gay attraction, which really shows just how desaturated and minute gay stories are, at least in the mainstream. So reading this, I'm blown away by just how all out in the open straight love stories are. The third thing is this underlines just how normal it is to talk about women's appearances and how abnormal it is to talk about men's appearances, especially when it comes to critiquing those appearances. And then finally, this is also very revealing as just how universal Jane Austen is. You can change and tweak and put things through a different filter, and not only does it still make sense, it reveals so much interesting stuff in there. And I'm actually curious to do this in reverse with Carmilla, which is the oldest, most classical lesbian story that I can think of. What if this was the story of Lawrence? What's that story going to be like? So that may be coming in the future. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in seeing how the rest of this novel progresses. I'm sure there's more interesting stuff to mine. And until next time, make history.